Is my name. Given I was just introduced, you probably didn't need that repeated. But Rob, I'm head up social enterprise policy within the Department of Rural and Community Development, and we have John at the table here in front of us, and Richard in the far table. Also, we work collectively on it. So over the past 1+ year, we've been trying to develop the new social enterprise policy, which is intended to publish towards the end of Q1 or very start of Q2. We're still targeting end of Q1 now. There's some sort of mechanics in government we have to go through. So I want to give you just a kind of heads up on where we're at and what the kind of typical issues are. But before I do, in terms of the event that's gone on today, to say thanks to Carol and Philip for inviting us down and letting us see some of the great work that's gone on. We were really happy to support it through the Dormant Accounts Fund. And some fabulous projects and some great themes to discuss there on stage, which will absolutely form a fairly central part of the new policy. So congrats particularly to the 6 winners. Thanks for the ILDN taking the time to put the project together, for assessing them, for putting the applications together, and the 60 odd other applicants who put them together. Never a small piece of work, of course. In terms of broad policy, we, as I say, have been working over the last year in terms of what the new policy should look like. The ILDN, we met particularly yourselves as an individual group, as we have at almost every other sectoral group. We've had written submissions, regional workshops, all sorts of one-to-ones, and a public consultation there just before Christmas, which closed at the end of Jan. And again, to thank Philip and Carol particularly for a very tight submission by the ILDN. Makes it very easy for civil servants like ourselves to interpret what the kind of key issues are for the sector, where we feel progress can be made, where progress is more challenging, and then you're into the grant space and so on, of course, because as somebody has already mentioned, social enterprises to a significant degree rely on accessing finance in the first place, which is a challenge, of course, but also accessing grant funding depending on what stage they're at. But particularly well done to the ILDN in terms of the tightness of their submission. As I say, when we're trying to get through hundreds of them, it is a very helpful thing for us to do, that thoughts are kind of well structured and have an evidence base and so on. I know yourselves have highlighted under 5 key themes what your major issues are, and that's around funding, policy alignment, the legal structure for social enterprises, and awareness of social enterprise in the wider public and what that means, where that sort of starts and finishes. And also with businesses and so on. So that kind of awareness building piece, and then on the personnel side and training and so on around skill sets and people and broader supports. So in terms of our own activity, I'd have to say that those themes that were highlighted are fairly consistent across the sector. It is a very wide family social enterprise. I'm in the division now a year, and I worked back in the old FÁS days in a former life in the community sector, and I had almost forgotten in the period since I had been there, embedded in the community and community work, what a kind of social enterprise was. In fact, I kind of have a much told anecdote now. I was in housing before where I am at the moment, and I was chairman of a company which was a social enterprise, and I didn't realise until I got into social enterprise policy that it was actually a social enterprise. So if I'm somebody who's embedded in the sector over a long period of time and I don't understand that readily, it obviously brings challenges for social enterprise in terms of their capacity to trade goods and services, which leads right the way through to identification, through to social impact, and what do we need to do to bring forward that social impact to allow you as a sector differentiate yourselves from others who may claim the same social impact. How do we prevent greenwashing, social washing? How do we make sure that it is readily consumable by people who don't have time to get into the bones of what social impact measurement is? How do we create a recognisable brand? That's something that the sector as a large, as a broad sector has to do. And there's all sorts of stuff which we don't have time to go into there, which feed into that. But I can say from my own perspective, we work quite a lot with Europe now, the OECD and the EU. There is a benefit for us as policymakers, besides the kind of domestic political environment, which is allowing us to bring some of this stuff forward. So up until now, it's been largely voluntary. It's been kind of good field stuff. It is beginning to move into a trajectory where it's based on European directives, compulsion under law, a real change in the way the EU and now the Irish government will be obliged to consider the social economy, proximity economy, social enterprise, whatever label it is you want to put on it, but how it is we collectively move the sector forward. And it is certainly going to gather pace over the next number of years. We, as civil servants inside, have been flagging that internally in terms of making sure that as a civil service and as a public service, in terms of whether it's Enterprise Ireland or local enterprise offices or over to the likes of the Awalia places in terms of active labour market programmes, that there's a more coherent structure across government to be able to pull all the various aspects of government that feed into how you do your business to make, to grease the wheels a little for you, if I could put it that way, and make your work a bit easy. So how are we doing that under the second policy? It's still a fairly nascent sector. And when I say nascent, it's I kind of imagine it as the fisherman with the net. How do you cast a policy net over a particular sector to allow you to bring it forward? As somebody has said to me when we went out in Dublin inner city, I've been here for 20 years doing what I'm doing. You're calling me a social enterprise now for the last 4 or 5 years. I could tell you stories, that kind of stuff, you know, that we don't go in with concrete boots on a community that has long been delivering social enterprise or social interventions, but that we try and get a kind of collective effort to understand what needs to be done to move that broad church forward. And that broad church includes entities which to an extent may always be dependent on some sort of grant support, because effectively they're demand efficient. They're there because there isn't a commercial capacity to deliver them, and to quite a large extent they can be contracted public services. How do we help those, and at the same time help those companies who have the capacity to scale up, the capacity to generate profit through the sale of their goods and services, and effectively stand on their own 2 feet and not have to spend a huge amount of time accessing grant supports? How do we deliver those 2 things at once? They are somewhat different animals. So that's something that we're working on at the moment. So in terms of what the policy should look like, if you look at the social enterprise public consultation document we published before Christmas, it gives you a signal of what's going to be in it. And as I say, it's fairly consistent with what the ILDN have highlighted. Some elements we'll make great progress on, some perhaps not so. So we'll have to see where we go. 5 themes and actions under each theme, which follow on from the public consultation. The policy will cover the years 2024 to 2027 at the moment. As I say, end of Q1 we're targeting, so we have to finish the draft now, which we're working through, giving it effectively a spit and polish at this stage. That will go through government and be approved by government, and we'll have structures then that compel the government to sign up to it, after which our own minister will publish. So not too surprising, given the kind of early nascent element of the sector. There is an awareness building strand, so that's all around the likes of conferences and supports and networking to give the sector a greater face and a greater capacity to interact with itself. We have then building and sustaining social enterprises. So what structures do we have to put in place for those enterprises who have the capacity to scale up, who have the capacity to become bigger, generate more through goods and services, and allow them to hit that path, engaging with the likes of Enterprise Ireland, local enterprise offices, and all the kind of local supports that may be available through yourselves and in LDCs, local authorities, and so on. And how do we make sure each one of those entities link up together? But we also have a sustaining piece. There are many social enterprises who may not have the capacity to scale up. They may be in rural communities where there's a limited amount of demand. How do we garner some sort of consistency for those social enterprises, and what's the differences in terms of their needs? We also, for the first time, I think, compared to the last time around, we have a dedicated section on the green transition, and that includes everything from circular economy to biodiversity to bioeconomy and so on. Again, specifically taking our lead from the Sustainable Development Goals, and also a lot of action that's going on in Europe for potential funds to support social enterprises in that space. On the building side, it's again all around building supports and the business supports and grant access to finance and so on. Actions in that space, so we would have been talking to social financiers, credit union movement and so on, around how access to finance and so on would be made available. National and international engagement, so that includes, we have national government, which I'm part of, we have local government, the mid-level, we may have local actors then. How do we make sure that there's two-way travel of information there in terms of making sure that the policy is implemented? We're planning, we're doing, we're checking, we're reacting. So we don't just have a policy on day one and we live with that policy until 2027. We understand it's a fairly rapidly changing environment, so how do we begin then to draw in and react to those changes? We anticipate we have far more engagement next time round with the EU and the OECD for reasons I've already explained, and also with colleagues around member states in Europe. Because I can tell you, I've been away now a couple of times on social enterprise, social economy, think-ins effectively with member states. It's exactly the same everywhere. There's the same battles between government ministers around who owns social economy, where it starts and ends, what sorts of supports are needed, and the same battle between agencies and bodies which are asked to implement policy. And when I say battles, it's just people recognising it's a new sector again, in the sense I've spoken about, but how far do we go, and where's the edge of our responsibility, and who takes over from there? So that element of it is still a bit of finding our feet. Then in terms of the discussion we had earlier on, the social impact and the measurement piece. So for the first time this year, we got sight of effectively how big the sector is. We think we're underestimating it, but it was a good first cut, and the ILDN were involved in that, identifying the fact we have over 4,000 social enterprises. They contribute over 2 billion a year in terms of traded income. They have over 85,000 volunteers made up of board members and individuals, and another 85,000 employees somewhere around. And again, some of those programs are very dependent on other government supports like community employment, CSP, and so on. So that allowed us for the first time to get a kind of colour and shape of the sector. But it is imperfect, we know that. Really good first cut, really detailed bit of research. To be honest with you, I didn't recognise the value of it myself when I saw it in the first instance, and I say that because I wasn't particularly involved, but as I've been in situ, I've certainly begun to understand how important that piece of work is. So we're absolutely committed to making sure we do more of that, and we expand out our understanding of what social enterprise is through something like a biannual research project. So that will be that will be done. And then just on the social impact piece, I was really interested to hear the conversation there, and I entirely noted that I come from a very different place as a national policy maker, in that my thinking, despite myself, was all around the kind of quantitative piece. How do entities manage social impact to be able to highlight for me what it is they do, so I can give grant support, or so that commercial companies can recognise what it is they do and have trust in it and not have to second guess it. And that is critically important, but it's really, really difficult. And we've committed to doing work in it under the new policy. I don't know what the answer to it is, to be honest. We were putting the delivery date on it further beyond some of our other delivery dates in the plan. And I think that's really critical to do. We're going to work with the OECD in a partnership model over the next couple of years on it. But what I realised when bodies were speaking there is, needless to say I knew it, but it just wasn't sitting in my mind, is the critical piece is that has to be done for the end user of the service. That's the first port of call. So the quantitative piece is important, the qualitative piece is where the business is at. So how do we come up with a system that allows me in one department, somebody in transport, and somebody in social protection, and somebody in ILDN or PUBL or whatever it is, not be pulverising operational people like yourselves with 5 different types of application form, 5 different types of social impact measurement. What can be done to boil it down a little, to put up parameters that are relatively easy for you to do, that doesn't cost an arm and a leg, that forces you to contract the work out, that takes you away from the day job, to begin to develop some sort of model that can separate you in the public's eye, who will buy your goods and services, or who will engage with the corporates, so the corporates can buy your goods and services, that allows you to concentrate on the day job and concentrate on the business end of what you do in terms of that social impact, the punter. It's a real challenge, to be honest, and Una kindly referenced the first social enterprise policy in terms of progress made, and we feel we've made some really good progress in some areas. That is probably an area that we don't feel we made enough progress on, and that's probably because of how difficult it is. So that's understood. There's a commitment there in the new policy to do something with it. I don't know what that will end up like, and it'll be, of course, critical for us to be making sure that we're talking to yourselves in terms of making sure whatever comes up is utilisable rather than a burden and does what's said in the tin. So look, that's a very quick run through. I suppose just a final point, I also look after rural policy. We are also undertaking a review at the moment with the OECD of Ireland's rural policy in the round, and that will be done over the next year and a half, and has fairly close tie into social enterprise in terms of the way we want to see rural economies transition, and we will absolutely be involved with the ILDN on that in terms of making sure that the OECD and ourselves understand the ILDN's view, but also what's going out there in rural economies. But we see those two things as kind of supporting each other. So we'll keep you posted on that, likely through the ILDN as to where that's going. It'll absolutely centrally inform the next rural policy, which we're already starting to develop, our Rural Future 2, if we could call it that. So we'll link with you on that. So I suppose just to close out, we recognise the critical importance of yourselves as social enterprise and the ILDN as our levers to make sure that we can try and engage with you a little better and collectively steer where it is we're trying to going. And it can be easy to roll off the tongue, but it is a kind of two-way process. Our intelligence in terms of where we think policy should go has to be informed by the kind of practical experience of yourselves. That's why we come out to events like this, so we can get the unfortunate stuff from our own point of view in terms of what's not working, as well as the stuff that is working. So look, that's a very quick run through. Hope to see many of you again. I've met a good number of you before, but hope to see many of you again. And most importantly, congrats to all the applicants, and well done. Thanks.